Hello again, everybody. Welcome to this special edition of CaneSport's old-time show, Countdown to Kickoff. It's always a special week when the Miami Hurricanes play the Florida State Seminoles, as they will on Saturday at 3:30 at Doak Campbell Stadium. And we're joined today by WarChant.com founder, longtime FSU guru, Gene Williams, who's going to give us a little insight into how these hated Florida State Seminoles have somehow surged past Miami in this race to get back to college football prominence, are 9-0, closing in on the college football playoff here so far in the 2023 season, with only one thing right now really standing in their way. Well, I guess two if you count the game against Florida in a few weeks, but we're not even going to acknowledge those guys. It's the Miami Hurricanes, and I was looking at some stats, Gene, from last year's game, and I was just laughing my ASS off. I mean, it was so ridiculous that I'm just throwing it in the garbage can. I don't think it's going to have anything to do with what goes on Saturday at Doak Campbell Stadium. Miami had 63 yards passing in the game. They had to roll a totally unprepared Ja'Carri Brown out there who couldn't even really function at this level of game. Florida State ran the counter run play. I believe it was 29 times. Miami's defensive coordinator, Kevin Steele, was totally unprepared for it. They had no answer for the counter runs. So Florida State just kept running it. Trey Benson finished with 128 yards. FSU had 229 yards rushing for the game. Jordan Travis only had to throw the ball 12 times. He had 202 yards and 10 completions. I mean, it was a total, absolute, complete debacle at Hard Rock Stadium last year. One of the most embarrassing moments for Miami in this storied series. I mean, the ghosts of Miami, Florida State, Gene, from the Miami standpoint, I could only imagine what they were doing. But I'm expecting a different game on Saturday. What's the mood up in Tallahassee?
Well, the mood's obviously pretty optimistic. FSU's rolling right now. I will say it's a little less trepidation than maybe a couple weeks ago. It looked like Miami's really rolling. I think after and you can talk about it more about Van Dyke's progression, injuries, whatever's going on with him. They have not looked like the same team the last couple weeks. So there's a little bit more. I think there was a lot of worry. I think the way they played against Clemson and even in that North Carolina, that shootout that they had with them, they looked pretty good in that game as well. So, they're very optimistic. I think the big storyline here is, are they going to be at full strength? Because when they played Pitt, their two top receivers, Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman, were out. And there's been a lot of speculation. It was almost a precautionary kind of thing. I think they realized, we'll never know for sure. Mike Norvell will never admit it. But you really think they almost said, look, we can beat Pitt without these guys. Let's get them 100% healthy for Miami. And they're practicing this week. Everything seems to be trending positively to that. And I think you're right. I think most of the fans look at this game as the final big hurdle. It looks like Florida's really kind of tanking the season right now. And they got to play Missouri and LSU, I think, both on the road before FSU. So they're going to be beat to hell before that game. So this is it. And at the end of the day, look, this could make Miami's season. We know talent-wise, these teams are pretty equivalent despite the records, despite what Miami's done. So that's the thing. You're going to get the best shot from Miami. So there's a concern about that. But I think a little bit of confidence stems from the fact that they have played well, that they're going to get their two biggest weapons likely back in this game. Obviously, FSU, regardless of who starts for Miami at quarterback, they're going to have the advantage at the most important position on the field, Jordan Travis, who's really, he threw for 360 yards against Pitt without his receivers. Not only did not have the top two, there were three or four other guys that were either out or banged up in that rotation. The fact that Ja'Kai Douglas had to be the go-to guy, he upped his game and he did it without running. That's the thing that's always in his hip pocket. If you watch Florida State, when they're in a tight game, Jordan Travis then goes, you know what, second half, I'm going to start running and opening things up, because I think they've realized he's a little bit fragile. He's not the biggest guy. You don't want him running around the whole game and getting hurt, because FSU obviously has bigger aspirations and they need Jordan Travis. So, I am expecting a pretty tight game, especially for most of it. But the key to me is going to be, I don't know how Miami's going to score enough points, because I think Florida State's going to score their points. They're going to do it. I think can Miami keep up with Florida State for 4 quarters? Can they do it for a half? Absolutely. Can you for 3? Maybe. 4 quarters? I don't know where that offense is going to be generated. I think that's how this is going to play out in my mind.
Yeah, well, I have a tendency to look at things through my orange and green colored glasses. I admit it. Okay, um, but I think that yes, Miami is coming into the game in not the greatest place because of the struggles of the quarterback. Nobody quite understands what's happened to him the last few weeks. I compared it in a column to what Simone Biles went through at the Olympics. Suddenly, with the stage fright, the twisties, whatever you call it, it was a mental block that she suddenly came onto at the greatest stage of her life after preparing her entire existence for that competition. Um, Van Dyke's under pressure this year. He's trying to get to the NFL. He's been banged up, which creates its own set of performance anxieties, and he has not been seeing the field at all. He's missing play after play, not making the right reads, underthrowing passes. It has been a complete, utter nightmare for Tyler Van Dyke in Miami because it obviously has led to a few losses. On the flip side, threw for almost 400 against Texas A&M early in the season. Same guy. Played relatively well at North Carolina. Had one or two bad plays that he'd like to have back. One really bad interception. But Miami kind of had a bad third quarter. North Carolina outscored them 21-0, and North Carolina won that game. And then NC State, they got 4th and 1. They're going in to take the lead in the middle of the fourth quarter, and NC State's defense did a great job. They anticipated what the play was going to be. They threw an extra man into the hole there, and they stopped the run play. And then Miami's defense caved after the whole game of playing spectacular. They gave up a 97-yard drive. Miami loses. But this Miami team in no way, shape, or form resembles, Gene, what we saw a year ago when these two teams played. The defense, markedly better, much better coordinated. He has a lapse here and a lapse there, which has cost Miami some this year, particularly in the North Carolina game where they were not ready for the hurry up offense. But much better defense than they had a year ago. The offensive line has been totally reshaped. Has been playing phenomenal football. Miami can run the football pretty well now, and these guys are now going to their 10th game together and have been progressively getting better as the season goes on. So the key becomes, what is Miami going to be able to do in the passing game? The good news for Miami is that receivers have been open. Okay, the plays have been there. They have a new offensive coordinator who has a good offense. The question I have for you is, I agree with you. If Miami's going to be in this game, it's going to be because it scores points and keeps up. Florida. You're not holding Florida State in the probably in the 20s. I mean, they're averaging, I think, about 40 points a game. So, what is the FSU secondary like? And their defense in general? I'm not sure they've been tested so much this year once they got past LSU.
Yeah, that'll be a question. It's actually been very good now that they seem to be relatively healthy back there. I think they're like number 4 in pass efficiency defense in the country or something. So I mean, I think it's a combination of, they haven't played the best throwing quarterbacks, I would say, outside of Jaden Daniels, who you mentioned first game of the year against LSU. So that's probably part of it, but they're solid. I mean, they're not spectacular. Ronaldo Green's a pretty good cornerback. They're solid at the safety position. There's nothing spectacular, but part of that, I think, is also, they get pretty good pass rush. Obviously, Jared Verse, guys like that. And that's the best friend of a secondary, is when you get pressure on the quarterback. And especially when a quarterback, is probably not overly mobile. If Van Dyke is out there, that is going to help him as well. So it's a decent secondary. I mean, definitely beatable. That's the thing. If you can give Miami's quarterback time, I think these guys have a chance to get open and make some plays against them. So yeah, I mean, it's nothing special, but it's solid. It's been good enough. The biggest thing they've done the last few weeks is they cut back on the breakdowns. Early in the season, they would have 3, 4 just horrible breakdowns in the secondaries where guys would run wide open. Now it's down to about 1 a game. There's one. I guarantee Miami's going to have one long pass play because somebody breaks down in the coverage. Pitt did it. If you saw the Pitt game, they did it. They got an 80-yard play. Fentrell Swipus ran the guy down and stripped the ball out on the 1-yard line. It went to the end zone and he recovered it. So he ended up saving himself from that breakdown on the play. But there's always one. So Miami's probably going to get one freebie in the game, would be my opinion.
All right, let's talk a little bit about how Florida State has gotten here. Okay, Mike Norvell takes over the train wreck from Jimbo Fisher, and goes 3 and
Don't forget
6.
Willie Taggart.
Oh, right. I can't forget Willie Taggart.
But
Right. Yeah.
everyone would
Yeah.
like to forget Willie Taggart.
For your benefit, I tried to forget Willie Taggart.
Thank you.
But they go 3 and 6 the first year, which is a complete statement on how bad these programs can become when they're not run properly. And Mario Cristobal has been facing the same thing. He's had to turn over almost the entire roster in about a year and a half. Massive use of the transfer portal. Has not done it as well as Florida State's done it. Quite honestly, Florida State's, I think, hitting on about 65% of their transfers. Yeah. Miami's hitting on about 45 in the last year and a half or so. But it has been a total culture rebuild, roster rebuild, so that they line up. The difference is Mike Norvell's in year 4 right now. Cristobal's in year 2, where Norvell was able to go from 3 and 6 to 5 and 7 and show a little bit of improvement. But I think you would agree that there was still some trepidation up there in Tallahassee, just like there is at Miami right now. People are freaked out over a loss here or there. I'm not quite sure what the expectations were. The over-under in Vegas was 7.5 coming into the season. Those guys are rarely wrong. They're usually somewhere in the ballpark, whether it's 7 or 8, doesn't really matter. They're usually right there in the wheelhouse. And it just takes time to build this thing, right, Gene?
Oh yeah, and you mentioned that 5 and 7, but you got to remember they started out 0 and 4, and that was the time when they had that horrendous loss to Jacksonville State at home, and there was a lot of rumblings, people, or message boards were filled, people wanting Mike Norvell fired. But as you said, when these programs like this are completely gutted of talent, they're run poorly. I mean, you have to start from ground zero, and that starts with gutting your roster and trying to build it up from scratch. So you could see the inner workings of what Mike Norvell was doing behind the scenes. He had the right, he was getting organized. He was getting the guys off the roster he needed to. And you mentioned those stats on the transfer portal. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, he just went in the transfer portal. A lot of that is also the talent evaluation. I mean, he's done a good job. Obviously, he had a very high hit rate, and not only taking guys who we knew were stars, but taking a lot of guys. Trey Benson, the running back, was nobody. I mean, he tore 3 different ligaments in his knee at Oregon. Nobody wanted him. And there's a lot of people here like, what are you doing taking him as a transfer? But when he was at Arizona State, he recruited him. He knew what his study was in high school, fast, and all the potential he had. Now he's probably going to be in the NFL next year. So he's done a really good job of scouting talent in the transfer portal and hitting at a high success rate. The other thing he's done so well, which is kind of the opposite of Willie Taggart, he's incredibly well organized. He just does a great job of everybody's on the same page with everything. He's got contingencies for every little scenario, and that always works out. I think offensively, he's a great mind. He understands how to scheme guys, talent guys, to get them in place to make plays. And that's kind of a talent. Some people can do it offensively and some can't. But he did it a little bit with lesser talent. Now that he's getting elite talent, he's putting the Keon Colemans and people like that into open space. And you're seeing the results of that. So, I mean, he's just done a tremendous job. And it does show that you can turn around a program pretty quickly nowadays. Before you had to build it through recruiting, Gary, I think, it was a longer process.
Yes.
You hit on some transfer portals now and do the right things, man. You're talking 2 years. You can go from cellar dweller to, competing for a playoff spot.
Yeah, you talked about traditional recruiting, and Florida State, they were ranked 18th in 2021, 24th in 2022, and 20th in 2023 in traditional recruiting. And that's okay, but not up to Florida State standards, which we're seeing this year, where I think they're number 4 right now in the recruiting rankings in this cycle and doing a much better job. But the transfer portal has absolutely, like you said, been gold for the Seminoles. Almost every key player on this team right now came through the transfer portal, and they've really done a great job of evaluating talent and bringing the right guys in. Who gets the credit for that, Gene? Who's doing those evaluations? Who is the key player behind bringing those guys in from the portal?
Well, I mean, again, the easy answer is Mike Norvell, obviously, because of his philosophy. But what he has done is he is one of the big things, and I think Michael Alford, who's the athletic director here, has given him the resources to be able to do stuff. So he massively increases support staff. And nowadays on a support staff, you got guys that go in, they look at recruiting film and all that. Florida State's got staff, and they're looking at film of players on other teams that might be transfer candidates. So when that happens, you know how that portal is that window is so quick. And watch when Florida State gets on a transfer portal guy, they're usually one of the first ones on him. The second that guy goes in the portal, Florida State pounces if it's a guy they want to get. So it's a lot of the support staff have really been working that hard, understanding that they do, especially let's say it's a position, if they need a defensive end, they are scouting all these defensive ends especially these teams. Maybe it's a lower echelon SEC team. I mean, like South Carolina's been almost a pipeline for Florida State. They're a scout team. They're a feeder team for Florida State. They seem to always pillage all of their players because, like, hey, do I want to be a defensive end in South Carolina? I want to go to Florida State. 9 times out of 10, they have an option. As long as your NIL is in there, you got a shot. And I think the other thing is you got to give credit to Florida State's NIL. They brought in a group, Battle's End started up a couple of years ago and really got a good infusion of money to be able to help compete with some of these teams. When you're going against the Georgias, the LSUs, the Alabamas, you got to play in that same playground and be able to do that. It's one thing to get them on campus to like the program, like the coach, like the campus. But man, if Georgia wants to offer the guy another couple $100,000 more for his NIL deal, you're not going to get him 9 times out of 10. So they have been very competitive in that space as well. With a Keon Coleman, I think it was Florida State and Ole Miss, I believe, down the stretch. And they made, I think they outbid Ole Miss to get him. And now you're seeing the fruits of that labor. They're a potential playoff team now because they're able to recruit Keon Coleman. We went in the portal and give him a very competitive NIL offer.
Yeah, Miami obviously understands what you're talking about. They've been a very key player in the NIL arena. They've had to transition a little bit. Started out with basically one guy, John Ruiz, and has transitioned into a pretty powerful collective that obviously needs to be able to do the same thing. And I think will be competing at that level and has been so far this year. But there's nothing like winning. Winning is still a factor, and I think a lot of these schools are becoming too reliant on just writing the check.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
everyone's
ask
got
Jimbo Fisher that.
yeah, everyone's exactly perfect example. I mean, everybody's got a bank account now, Gene.
Yeah.
It's like you got to get back to the relationships and the traditional recruiting, and it helps to have a winning program. And this is where FSU, as much as it obviously kills everybody down here, has really started to distinguish itself because they got to 9-3 last year, which was a sign of
10. They ended up with a bowl game. They got 10 wins. So be able to go in the recruiting transfer poll and say we're 10 wins. And like you point out, that record better and better and better. So the thing with Mike Norvell, people liked him. He's very engaging. But it was like recruiting against him is like, look, he was almost fired a year or so ago, whatever that was. He's not, they don't have that great of a record. Now all of a sudden he's proving it on the field. So the product's there now. It's like, okay, got a coach we like, good campus, program with a lot of tradition. You got a competitive NIL and you're winning ball games. So that is the recipe. And I think now, like you said, now they're going to traditional recruiting. They've got a top 5 recruiting class on the way, and they've got 2. They got a ton of 5 stars. Of course, it's the biggest recruiting weekend of the year when Miami comes to town. So they're going to sideline's going to be loaded with elite recruits this weekend as well.
So the guy who 24 months ago we were firing,
yeah,
everybody was firing, now is the blueprint for how you get it done in college football. Obviously, Miami is trying to follow a similar blueprint, just as 2 years behind where Mike Norvell is here in year 4 of his existence at Florida State. So you come into this season off a 10-win season last year, all that momentum. Did you see this coming in as a team that would be undefeated here in the middle of November?
I think most of us close to the program saw the talent, saw everything that was going on, having really all your key players back. Obviously, when you have a veteran quarterback who's a Heisman candidate and you've got all the pieces around him, they're going to be very competitive. They're going to be good. I thought this was an ACC championship caliber team. I think I would have bet against the playoffs. I just thought they would stumble once on the schedule. They still may. Obviously, they're pretty heavily favored to win the rest of the regular season games. So they slightly exceeded expectations, but also on the other side of it, the schedule has not proven to be as difficult. Obviously, Clemson is not Clemson like they were. Some of the other, so they really haven't played a gauntlet of a schedule so far this year. So I mean, I would expect them, based hindsight how the schedule turned out, they should be undefeated at this point.
I mean, LSU played them kind of tough in the opener, and they ended up having a great second half and running away from those guys, which was obviously very impressive. The team that challenged them the most, very bizarrely, was Boston College on the road in week 3, with a 31-29 game that Florida State was life or death to win. The
Yeah.
Clemson game, huh? Go ahead.
No, I say, yeah, you're right. But I mean, look at BC since they're 6-3. Once they got that quarterback Castellanos in there, I'm telling you, that guy is going to be trouble for the ACC the next couple of years. A very dynamic, good quarterback. I mean, they've still got a shot to be in the ACC championship game. I mean, they've kind of come out of nowhere. They're actually a quality team. And obviously, that was, and you know how this is, Gary. You go on a road. I think that was a sleepy nooner. You're playing BC. They barely beat Holy Cross the week before.
Yeah.
So nobody took them seriously. And Florida State, I think they were up 20 points in the second half and just, it was like they were taking knees all the time. No offense, Miami, taking knees in that game, and just BC with Castellanos kept making. They literally must have converted 10 third and longs in that second half. I've never seen anything like it. And yeah, suddenly they were fighting for their lives. So that was just one of those weird games that went on there. The thing, they don't get credit for beating Clemson. We saw Notre Dame going into Clemson is still very difficult to do, despite the record. Notre Dame found that out, and
100%.
so they, winning in overtime. But I mean, it shows, the fact that I think the other thing this team has, they are able to win those close games. Jordan Travis is able to turn it on when he needs to. And it's nice to be able to, in a close game, I'm just going to throw it up to Keon Coleman in situations to have a go-to guy like that, which they haven't had probably since the Jimbo era. They haven't had a go-to receiver.
Well, the last 5 weeks have just been a walk in the park. Have not been challenged very much. And now here comes this Miami team. And, Miami lost the Georgia Tech game because, like you said, it didn't take a knee. Played a bad quarter at North Carolina and did get 4th and 1 at NC State. Those 3 things, and that's woulda, shoulda, coulda.
We'd have
Excuses.
game day. I wish it would have, because you'd have game day here right now to be the biggest
Yeah.
game of the week.
I mean, Miami to me is not where Florida State is right now, but I don't see Miami as that far behind, and we're going to find out Saturday because they're going to come up to Tallahassee ready to play. There's not going to be any excuses. The coordinators are better. Everything's better than it was a year ago when it was a total joke in that game at Hard Rock. So we'll find out what's the truth on Saturday. I think Miami is much better. I think that Miami is a sleeper team because of the way that they've lost when they've lost. Now, they've also won 2 games in overtime, so it goes both ways. I think that they are capable of challenging Florida State on Saturday. I think they will be ready to play, and I'm expecting a really good game into the 4th quarter, along the lines of how many Miami-Florida State games have been in the past. I will be disappointed if they go up there and get blown out. What kind of vibe are you guys seeing from Florida State? Do they respect this Miami team? Are they seeing the same thing I'm seeing? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm sure Mike Norvell and the staff, they're fully dialed in that this is Miami. Like you said, they know Miami's going to play the best game they probably have all season, because it's Florida State. Because as bad as those couple losses where you mentioned, Gary, if they win this game, it changes the whole narrative and how much momentum that would give Miami going into the off season to have that under their belt in recruiting, transfer portal, everywhere else. So I think they understand that. Plus, when they see the U on the other side of the field, they're going to also want to give it their best. I mean, there's
100%.
a motivation regardless of whatever Miami's record or regardless of the last game. This isn't like the BC game or some of these other ones where maybe they took them lightly. There's nobody in this team that's going to take Miami lightly at all. So yeah, I'm curious to see how this will play out. I think a big key will be beginning of the game. I do think Miami will hang in there for at least a half, if not 3 quarters. But the key will be, to me, is Van Dyke comes out. If he starts, I know there's some rumblings if he comes out and struggles early and Florida State gets ahead, then I think Miami might have a problem. If
Yes.
Florida State jumps on them early and that stadium's going to be rocking, and the quarterback situation, but if he comes out slinging, throwing it like you said, how he did early in the season, then I think we're going to have a very entertaining, very competitive game.
Yeah, Miami needs the Texas A&M Tyler Van Dyke to
Yeah.
show up at Doak on Saturday, and he's got to know this is it for him. Like, if the real Tyler Van Dyke doesn't show up in this game, I don't think you'll ever see him line up for Miami again. Quite frankly, I mean, then if he can't get this done on Saturday, I don't see them going into next season with him as the quarterback. I just don't. So
We
so
might as well
this
go
is
to the
it.
freshman anyway, right? At that point, I mean, what do you have to gain by keeping
Well,
him
if
out
they
there?
put him back out on the field again, he loses his red shirt. I don't know how they feel.
Okay.
I don't know how they feel about that. I personally would try to get that red shirt. I think this is a kid that could be a
Okay.
start quarterback in this program for 3-4 years. He's going to be really, really good. He's not ready for this yet.
Yeah.
So I think they would love for Tyler Van Dyke to return to being Tyler Van Dyke and finish off these last 3 games so that they can redshirt Emory Williams. But we'll see. I don't know how it's going to play out. But 2 things I want to ask you about before we go. What's the Florida State offensive line like?
It's average. But it's really weird. Now, one of the things we do at War Chant, I like to track the PFF scores and grades and all that stuff. And I've never seen such an odd circumstance. They have been lousy blocking for the run, which you mentioned that last year they were so good running that counter. They were a great running team. They've been mediocre at best running the football. A lot of that's on the line. They're just not. They've had some injuries. Some guys aren't playing as well as they did, which is weird because they've got so much experience in depth on that line, but they've just been very mediocre in that department. On the other hand, pass blocking, they've been very, very good. I mean, they've got to be, I think they're top 10 in the nation in terms of pass blocking on grades. They've done a really good job protecting Jordan Travis, which will obviously be huge in this game. I don't think, because I know Miami's very good against the run. I think they're going to have a hard time running the ball consistently. So I mean, that's where they're going to have to butter their bread. But of course, Miami, as you know, also has excellent safeties, and I think that's the one thing I think going to has to concern Florida State a little bit about this is as good as Jordan's been when he's got Johnny and he's got Keon on the field. He loves to force the ball to those guys. He just doesn't think anybody's going to be able to stop them doing that. So even though he's got easier stuff underneath, he will force that down there. And I don't know if they played some safeties like Miami has this year. So to me, that'll be a very interesting competition. But yeah, you're getting back to the offensive line. Like I said, it's a tale of 2 cities, man. They can block for the pass pretty well, not so good against the run. So I think this is one where they will throw to try to set up the pass or throw to set up the run a little bit.
To me, that's where the ball game is going to be right there. Miami's
Yeah.
going to bring it. Miami is coming. They're coming fast. They're coming hard. They are going to look to do whatever they can do to mess up Jordan Travis. And if the Florida State offensive line can hold up, it's going to be tough. If they can't,
Yeah.
it's going to be a ball game. How about run defense?
That has been very good. They're very deep there. I think one thing they've done that's very interesting is I've never seen anybody do anything like this, but it's almost like Mike Norvell. The starters along the front 4 will only play half the game, and it's not when they're literally in the second drive of the game. You've got second and third stringers in there, which is just weird because you'll see then Florida teams will be able to run the football a little against Florida State when the backups are in, but then the next series the starters come back in. And he's resting this guys not only for the season but for the games. But then you'll find in the fourth quarter, if the game's close, those starters are out there a lot and they're fresh. And then season wise, he's trying to protect these guys. So when we get to where we are now in November and then hopefully the postseason, they've got really fresh guys up front. So they've been solid, pretty good against the run. Like I said, they seem to have some breakdowns occasionally. Again, won a game, and a lot of those times is when he's got the backup. So he's taken some criticism for it, but on the whole, obviously it's worked out because he's been able to keep these guys healthy and fresh throughout games.
All right, Gene. Well, looking forward to the trip as always. I mean, I like the games. I don't really like coming to Tallahassee because they gouge you on hotel rooms. I mean, it's a
Oh
total
my
joke.
God, it's incredible.
I mean, it's like the biggest joke I've ever seen. They're unlike any other place you ever go. Like they
Well, it
just
doesn't help. They've probably got 6 hotels in the whole city, so that
no, they got a lot of hotels. They're just mostly they're just motels.
yeah. Well, I don't count those.
Yeah, I don't blame you. But like, all those other elements, flights are hard to get into the air, the whole thing. But the game itself has always been great. Going to Doak Campbell Stadium is a very special experience. I am looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing you and your staff. 3:30 on Saturday, Miami, Florida State. Hopefully the Miami Hurricanes show up and we have a really good college football game. And we'll see if Florida State can get through this one. They will certainly most likely have a ticket to the college football playoff. So for Gene Williams, I'm Gary Ferman. Thank you for joining us today on CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff. Have a great day, everybody.